We'll be starting in verse 10, and we'll read verses 10 and 11. I'll be reading from the NIV. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, "Now come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God, and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives as much as to drink from death."
How y'all doing this morning? Good. All right. So, in the text that was just read for us, we hear about Satan, who accuses against us before God at one point in time, day and night, and that he's been thrown down. And I want you to look at the text there in the order of how they mention how the triumph happened, and that is through the blood of the Lamb and by the testimony of the saints, basically, is what we're talking about. And today we're talking about your story, our story, the story of us, and how that plays a part in accomplishing God's purpose in bringing souls to Jesus. Now, I know a lot of you in this room, and there's some amazing stories in here. And I sit in the back a lot of times. I'll stand in the back, and as I look up through here, I'm thinking, if this person just knew this about this person's story, if this person just knew this about that person's story, what a connection they would have, what a support they could be. And that has proven harder over the years to make happen than you would think. Sometimes it happens really organically. Sometimes people are comfortable sharing their story. Sometimes it's really painful and it's raw. It just has a lot of wounds with it. You know, my brother Amo back here, I call him my guardian angel. I met him at work. We happened to do a project at his company, bought some stuff from my company, and we hit it off. And knowing Amo over the years, he's even came here and gone through a marriage class with us that was deeply personal, you know, the sharing that you do in there. And, you know, for instance, if you knew Amo's story, coming from French Guiana and moving to New York and then moving to the South 30 plus years ago, and all of the twists and turns in his story. But two of the most powerful things in his story is when we were in this marriage class, they said, what's meaningful to you? And he said that his wife, Anita, chose him, even though it came at great cost to her. It was not a popular choice with her family. It wasn't her plan that was made for her by her family, but it was her plan. And Amo tells me this story about when he's trying to get some paperwork or get a room or something, and he's dealing with, and he can tell you her name to this day, 30-something years later, but he's got a suitcase full of love letters to Anita that they've written every day for all these years. And these are powerful stories, right? And when you hear that, it inspires you to want to be a better person, to want to love people better, to want to have lived a life in which you can make a difference. The good news is every one of our stories can make a difference in somebody's lives. And that's what we're going to talk about here this morning. Let me get my notes out here. So when we think about the things that go on around us that we would like to change, when we think about the things that we've been through, one thought that comes is, it's not another president or another senator or another elder in the religious context of things that's going to change, make that real lasting change. Now, leadership has a huge role. And as a leader, I would say everything rises and falls on leadership. And what we're really saying there is we want to, in those different roles, whether it be in your home or your workplace or wherever you find yourself, there's an opportunity to lead. And when we say that everything rises and falls on leadership, that's more in the context of saying if there's credit to be had, give that credit away. Let other people shine. If there's something that didn't go to plan, we're going to take that. We're going to say, hey, that's on me. We're going to evaluate that and get better. But really, when we talk about real, lasting cultural change, that change happens from the bottom up. That change happens with you and with me and with the interactions that we have each day. And so real cultural change happens in the hearts and in the homes and in the workplaces, in conversations that you have. And I spend a lot of time thinking about this as a business owner. I founded a company, and one of the things that really drove me to want to do that was to make an impact in people's lives. And I've had lots of different jobs throughout my career, several jobs that people would probably never leave. And part of my frustration in many of those roles in corporate America would be just struggling with resources and the ability to make an impact in actually helping people in their lives with soft skills, with communication skills, just being able to invest in people. And so when we think about how much time that we spend in a given week at church or at work or at school, it's easy to understand that why the tone that you set at work has a big influence on culture. There's a saying that I really like, and it's what you allow, you promote. And so if you allow people to treat you poorly, if you allow people to tell you lies, if you allow people to not value your time as important, you're training those people about how to treat you, and you're promoting for more of that behavior. And so one of the opportunities we get in workplaces is, one, we spend as much waking time there generally as we do at home through the course of a week for a lot of you in careers. So just the sheer amount of time you're there, so the tone that gets set there, the expectations, and just the interactions, it has a huge opportunity to impact culture. And what happens in that workplace environment goes home. It follows people home. It becomes the standards that they expect at home. It becomes the conversation that they're able to have with their spouse, the conversation they're able to have with their family or their child. And so this is one way, an example that I can resonate with, how we see cultural change from the bottom up. We do have a challenge, we kind of touched on it there, that even if we're coming to everything that happens at this building, that still only adds up. I think we did the math up here one time in a class. It's 2, 3%, 1%, 3%, something like that. It's a very small amount of time. So how do you let people know your story outside of this context? Well, it requires more than shallow religious interactions. And when I say that, I don't know what comes to your mind, but I'm sure something comes to your mind. These shallow religious interactions with how you doing, what's going on, just skipping through, never getting below the surface. Or when people are not listening. If you're meeting someone and you're just busy, telling them how they're wrong or how to do something, or just being a critic to them, there's not a lot of encouragement there to drive that change that you get the opportunity when you share your story. So every story has an origin, and those origins aren't pretty a lot of times. If you think about the characters in the Bible, and I say that not as if they're fictional characters, but your actual spiritual ancestors. If we think about their stories, they're not glamorous. They're not, and we often talk about that being part of the authenticity of how we have faith in the accounts that we read there, right? Because this is not something that somebody would write about themselves. It's not something they would post on their Facebook. It is not their highlight reel. And so when you think about stories, stories are powerful tools, and they're used all throughout society to entertain, to educate, to teach. I always think about Nathan talking to David as the gold standard of communication, and he did that with a story. And so think about a story that just is flatline, right? It's, hey, Jim was born into a Christian home. It all came easy to him. He lived a great life, and he died. We're here today to celebrate his life. Yeah, there's not a lot to relate to there for me. I don't know if there might be to you, but that's not been my walk. So these great stories that become book series that our kids read, or fantastic movies or epics, they all have these twists and these turns, and they have low spots, they have struggle, they have overcoming. And I have a strong suspicion that each one of your lives has that same arc in a different way. We'll talk we could spend the rest of the time that we have here today just talking about the story of I think it's group 5 now, right? It's been group 9, it's been group 5, but Tara, she's got a wonderful chapter in the story of group 5. Yeah. With what was our guy's name from Kannapolis? I forget it now. We had a stranger in our group that we accidentally put his phone number in our group text. Yeah, Matt remembers his name, but it was saved in your phone as Tara Fisher, and he's saying these wild and crazy things. And so just the story of group 5 alone, we could spend the rest of our time. But your story, there's chapters in my story I would have never written. I would not have written that script. There's stuff that's playing out in my life today that I would never have written that script. Yet here I find myself living through it, learning from it, and actually being able to relate to people that I meet on a daily basis. So part of what happens there is we have these hidden struggles, and some of your struggles are hidden more than others. And those struggles that we go through, and we're trying to find the courage to have that conversation with somebody. And sometimes we'll have that conversation with somebody, and they'll betray that trust. And that's painful. And that will make us want to go even more inward and try to carry that weight on our own. But that doesn't help get our story out. We have private shame about these struggles. The struggle in overcoming, especially we see that a lot in the Bible accounts. It's not a straight line. This, especially in this study we've been doing of Abraham, he's gone back to his old habits a couple of times. He's told a lie more than one time. He's tried to take it on himself more than one time. Now, imagine as that's playing out, it's a private experience for him for portions of that, but it became very public, and God's used that story to change many of our lives. And so these struggles, they're a story that has great power, but that story only has power if we share it. Now, a lot of the reasons that we don't share that story, and I did a Google search on this. Why do people not share their stories? And I didn't want to be too much of a risk taker up here this morning, but there was a version of this where I pulled out my phone and I asked Google, hey, what's the definition of testimony? But you can never tell what they're going to say, so we're not going to do that this morning. But hey, what's the version of testimony? Because some of you, when I think about testimony, we don't typically use that in the Church of Christ vernacular, right? Give up and give your testimony, right? But I've seen that in a lot of places in my life, and it's pretty powerful. But when you think about testimony, probably a lot of you like to watch these murder, mystery, crime, drama things, and people get up there and they give their testimony under oath. This testimony. So what is testimony? Or what is the witness? Or what is sharing your story? And so I asked and did a little bit of research on why do we not share our story? And there were some things that came up like, well, some people might think it's being boastful, or some people might think it's being proud, or different things. But by and large, it's fear. It's not modesty. It's not that we don't that we have a virtuous motive behind that. It really comes down to fear, and fear is going to whisper. Shame whispers. People are going to judge you. Anybody ever have that thought about sharing? Hey, if I share this, I'm going to get judged. I might not be invited back here, right? Well, the truth is people are going to judge you anyway. Whether you say this or you say that, there's always going to be a critic. There's always going to be somebody telling you how you could have done it better, or how you did it wrong, or that you're this or you're that, or Sister Susie over here is better than you. That's part of the human experience. So if people are going to judge you, anyway, I would say consider that and having the courage to share your story. So we can also be isolated by saying we're not enough, right? What you've done is not enough, or you've struggled too much, or you've given in one too many times to that voice that says, just indulge in this vice of whatever your particular struggle is. We can have perfection that paralyzes us, or the need for perfection. And that can be, I'm going to get this problem solved. I'm going to deal with this, and then I'll have a better story to share with somebody. And there's a couple of different ways you can think about that. I've heard people talk about that in terms of saying, well, I'm going to get clean, and then I'll go take a shower. Well, that makes no sense, right? And we see that a lot of times with people contemplating repenting or giving their life to Christ in the first place. Hey, I'm going to fix these things, and then I'll do that, because then I'll feel better about it, or I'll feel like I've accomplished something. And so that voice in your head that says, just let me fix this a little bit more, and then I'll have a better story, that stops us. The truth is that Satan doesn't have to destroy your story. He just has to get you to hide it. And so your story is powerful only if you share it. And if you think about water is a good example. So if you have water and it's moving and it's flowing, it stays clean, it's clear. If you have it in a dam or some other conduit where you're channeling it to work for a useful purpose, that power is obvious. But you can take that same water and put it in a pond that has no spring feeding it or no outlet, and it will become stale and stagnant, rancid. It will in fact become poisonous. And so your story has this same potential. It can be powerful, but only if you share it. And the good thought here that we can rest in is that Jesus does not call his people to hide. He doesn't call us to hide our stories. What he calls us as his people is light. So we were never meant to be hidden. So we want to think about moving our testimony from thinking about it at the moment as a weapon, and we're going to come back to that. And we want to think about your testimony, my testimony, our testimony together as visible light. And when we go over to Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 through 16, we'll talk about the city on the hill that cannot be hidden, to let our light shine. And we talked about it a minute ago, about the fear of sharing and why we don't share and different things like that. So the truth is there is a cost to standing out, right? And as we go out into this world and we share our stories, and probably one of the stories that we're going to share that's going to relate to people is the stories of struggle. Hey, we are a group of Christians. We are dedicated to Christ and trying to do the best that we can, but we don't have it all figured out. And sometimes we hurt each other's feelings. Sometimes we say things and we do things that people would find out of place, when they're thinking about going to a church, or they're thinking about what America or society has told us a church should be, and having it kind of all put together. So there is a cost to standing out when we share these stories. But the cost of hiding our light is even greater. So when we think about why we were redeemed, why God has sought us out, what talents he's given us, what purpose he's given us, the unique gifts that he's given each one of you, and the work that you have here to accomplish. He didn't rescue you to hide you. God rescued you to shine through you. So the question as we transition into this next thought is, what kind of story can God use? Can he only use the clean parts? And most often, the parts that we would prefer to hide are the most relatable parts to other people. So when you begin to discuss your life with somebody, or you're just meeting somebody for the first time, you have the small talk. Where are you from? What do you do? Kind of what's going on. But you think about the people that you've made the biggest connections with. Like, I shared kind of a little bit of my story with Amo. I don't even remember how Amo and I got to the point that we were good friends. It just seemed like it happened naturally, organically. But we talked somewhere in there about something, I'm sure, that made a connection. And I do remember him inviting me to go to the Chinese buffet. And we've had many meals at the Chinese buffet. But somewhere in there, we began to share the struggles that we had been through. And Amo has seen the biggest struggles in my life and the biggest struggles in my family. And he's sat right there with me, and he's supported me, not blindly, in a way that he would just tell you whatever you need to hear. He told me some stuff I didn't want to hear too. But, this doesn't happen. These bonds, they don't get created unless we're willing to share those parts. And like I'm saying, and the point that I'm trying to make here is those are the most relatable. I've seen it in these classrooms. I've seen it outside these walls, spending time with you guys individually as well. So your story doesn't need to be perfect to be powerful. The authenticity is really found in those nuggets. And we talk about that too a lot of times in the study of the Bible. The things that we see in there are not, again, things that those people would write about their lives, right? But we say, hey, this adds to the authenticity, to the trustworthiness, or to the credibility of the Bible story. Well, it does the same thing in your life. So being unfinished does not mean that the story is unusable, right? The struggle that you're going through right now, as you share that with somebody else, they may be, and I'll use the analogy a lot of times as mile markers. So if you're on a mile marker on a journey, Mike is at mile marker 80, I might be at mile marker 60, and he saw things at mile marker 65 that he's going to tell me about, but he doesn't have to be all the way there and have that finished story yet for it to be usable. So the wounds and the regrets and the battles that you've experienced, they may be exactly what somebody else needs to hear. And again, we talked about those shallow religious interactions. If you're having this performative perfection that, everybody's got it all put together, that is actually off-putting to folks. So as we share those struggles, it's that honesty that people can relate to about how you began that transformation. So again, we'll reiterate there that the thing that makes you reluctant to share your story is often the very thing that makes it relatable. And we go through so many human experiences that we don't talk about that I think it's easy for us to believe that we're the only one going through that. And I'm certain that there's things that you guys have gone through in your lives that I can't relate to at all. But I'm pretty certain somebody in this room can. And if you're talking about a health journey or a fitness journey, people don't want to get up, they don't want to move, they don't want to exercise, or they don't want to not eat these certain things, or they really struggle in certain areas. And one thing you'll find out as you begin to talk to other people, like even people who are really good athletes most of the time, like they don't want to do it either. Like it's not something that you're broken, it's not something that you're just deficient in. It's just part of the process. And spiritual maturity is no different. So as we go through this maturity, we talked about the mile markers on the journey, right? So the behaviors and the experiences that you have at 20, mile marker 20, mile marker 40, mile marker 60, 80, they're going to be different. And one thing we would love to see in there, and it gives a lot of power to our story, is maturity. In Philippians chapter 8, I think it's 4 through 8, excuse me. It says, "Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are honest, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things." And so, early in these journeys, it can be easy to have a pretty dark mindset. right? There can be complaining and struggle and why me, and as you get further down this journey and you begin to mature, that becomes a powerful part of your testimony in people seeing this hope. And one of the things that we'll encounter there is early on, you may say, well, this thing's bad, like it's clearly bad. Even the secular people in the world know this is bad, all right? And then you've got this good thing. And that's a great, especially if you're in a place in life where you're struggling with just bad, like it's a lot of bad choices, or sometimes all bad choices, right? And to take that step to say, I'm making a good choice. There's hope in that. There's character building in that. There's a step in the right direction. One of the ways I like to say that is you're going to make mistakes every day, but if you can own your action and move toward correction, you don't have to close the entire gap, but if you just step toward correction every day, take that opportunity, then over a period of time, you're going to be over here, right, and be able to move away from this. And so in the same thought, as we mature through our journey and our story evolves, it's not simply saying, well, here's a bad thing and here's a good thing, and I didn't do this bad thing, and so, good job. And we talk about this in the scripture about moving from milk to meat, and that's the idea here, is that eventually as you continue to grow and you continue to mature and your story evolves and God works in you in ways that you can't even imagine right now, your choices are going to be good. So I have this good thing and I have this good thing. I've got all these good things to choose from, but I can't do them all. And if you spend any time with AR, he'll talk to you about capacity and calendars and timing and scheduling, and really that form of stewardship and choosing the yes where you can make the most impact. And so if you've not seen that in your life, if you're struggling with, making a good choice, but I've still, got some bad things over here that, I'm saying no to, but I'm not really growing and moving in that direction, I would encourage you to take stock of, what options lie in front of you and grow in a way that you have basically all good options, and now you're having to pick. When you get to the point that you're saying no to some really good things that you really want to do because you are trying to say yes, or you're saying yes to these things that move the needle or make the most impact, that's a powerful testimony, and it's a great indicator that we're growing into the maturity that God calls us to. So not every good opportunity is your God-given assignment. And I know that's not a language we use here a lot, so don't get upset. But just think about, we have gifts, we have talents, right? And we have some wonderful things that we do here. I think about Kathy and how she's, again, you think about stories. If you ever get a chance to talk to Kathy, we got a chance to spend the afternoon with her not too long ago, and she told me all about the Texas oil refinery and being a young wife and growing a family there with Bobby. It's amazing. So these stories are really good. I encourage you to make some time at least once a month and get out and know people and get to know their stories. But Kathy is continuing to write her story, and she inspires me a lot. She's obviously got some health issues when you're breaking her bones and just being wild and crazy, but she's right back here, getting these food items in order, making sure that people within our congregation have their needs met if needed, and then beyond that, reaching out and helping all of us to make an impact in this community. And so one of our assignments is clear. You may look at things and say, this is good, but this is not for me. But I would encourage you to not criticize other people and don't run other people and other things down. I would say, hey, if that's not your calling, but it's a good work that's making an impact over here, get busy with whatever your calling is and get to doing the work. But one of our assignments is clear for everybody, and that is that light does not belong in the darkness. Light actually belongs in the dark places. And so we see things, we talked about cultural change in the beginning, and there's all types of things in this world that break our heart in culture. I've got a book here that Dory's reading that I snagged off of her chair that's called to Foster. Have any of you guys read this book? All right, I would say read it. We were watching a podcast, and the author, her name's Jen Lilly, and she's telling her story and the story of the foster system. And I know there's some folks in here who have experienced and lived that foster system, and there's been some good outcomes, and there's some real tragedies that come out of that too. And we have an opportunity here with the work that we've done next door with the Open Door House and the Christian Cooperative Ministry that is some people's calling, and they've plugged into that, and they've helped, and we've made an impact in people's lives. But those things that you see in culture that you want to change, that break your heart, some of the accounts in this book that they talk about, they're pretty rough. And frankly, if they don't stir you up and make you have a righteous anger about those things and want to take action, it'd be hard to imagine how your heart might be if that didn't move you to think about these children and these different experiences that they're going through. And we don't need a committee or a fund or a foundation or anything for us to make an impact there as individuals. And when Jesus talks about identifying with the hungry, identifying with the stranger, identifying with the sick and the imprisoned, when I read these stories, and this lady's story was she has some children, biological children, she has some children that they fostered in different scenarios. It really opened my eyes that when Jesus says, well, you came to me and you visited me in prison, that not every prison has bars, right? There's some prisons we're driving by on our way here to worship at this church every day. There's people in this community that are living experiences that we can't even imagine. And so the darker the light, or the darker the place, the more necessary the light. And when one person carries light into the darkness, another story can begin to change. And just like if we had a candle up here, and I had my light, and I had it shining here, and I wouldn't share that with anybody, but you all had a candle, and you could all come up here and light your candle off of my candle. That wouldn't take anything away from my candle at all, but it would create more light. And this is the same notion that I want you to carry out of this lesson today in terms of this story. Your story, our story, is that sharing that story is not going to take anything away from your light. It's only going to create more light into these darker places. And so your story may become the bridge that someone else walks across to meet Jesus. Testimony breaks this isolation that people feel in these prisons, and it exposes the lie that change is impossible. It's easy when you get down into a mindset or a struggle in life to feel like it's impossible to get out of this. In that moment, it may even physically be, right? But having someone else come alongside you, we were talking about that the other night in Bible study about Paul, when Paul was in prison, and I think Carrie made the comment, well, people came and visited him. Like, it's clear here that people came and visited him. Sharing that story, it provides that lifeline to someone else to know that change is possible and that it can happen. So as we wrap up this morning, I want to ask you the question, what part of your story have you kept hid under a basket? And who that you could be talking to needs the hope that God has already given you? And where is God calling you to stop being silent and to start showing up? And we'll close with this thought, that your story is not finished, but it's already useful in the hands of God. When I grew up, I was pretty disruptive in church. My mom will tell you back there, she had to correct me a lot. But one thing that I've noticed as I've gone through to the mile marker I'm at on my journey now is there was more people that would come down, and I know in our society, our social skill set, going through COVID and the whole journey that we've had, that's not as comfortable as a thing as it used to be for people. But it is inspiring, and it is a part of sharing your story. My mom was telling me the other day that her and Larry, my parents here visiting from Tennessee, they baptized 3 people a couple of Sundays ago at their church after the invitation. I thought, man, that'd be amazing. I'd just so encouraging in sharing your story. So this will be a time when I was growing up, we would share what you call the invitation to come on down. And if you need prayers, if you got something going on in your life that you're struggling with, maybe it's not even in your life, maybe it's somebody you know. I've got a dear friend of mine named Jesus. He and his wife are getting ready to have a baby. And I've been praying for them. I've been asking people to pray for them. It could be as simple as that. Hey, I got this person that I know, and I'm really concerned about them, and I want us as a congregation to pray for them. It could be that you've been thinking about getting baptized, or you've been baptized and given your life to Christ, and you've been struggling in isolation and shame, and you're not happy with where your story is at today. This would traditionally be a time that we would say, hey, we're going to sing an invitation song. Walk on down here to the front. Somebody will pray with you. It can be as public or as private as you wish. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, find somebody in the foyer or in the auditorium here as we let out, and we can do that in a less public way. Or you can call or text through the week, anytime, day or night. But I would encourage you not to share your story with somebody, the struggles that you're going through, and not to carry them all by yourself. So as Caleb comes up and we get ready to stand and sing, I would invite you to come down and let us pray for you, and let us be a part of your story as you go forward.